So this is the sixth and final part of my chat with James Blair. He shared some amazing and really helpful insights, so please do go back and listen to the other topics that we've covered if you haven't done that already. In this part, we're talking about showing vulnerability at work, particularly as a leader or manager. Here we go. Something that you've mentioned a few times now in across our chat is the word vulnerability. That's coming up a lot. And we know, I mean, again, this touches on our sort of British stiff upper lip thing, but showing vulnerability, particularly, I think, from a senior leadership point of view, it's hard enough across the board. You know, I think everybody struggles with this to a point, some more than others, but I think there seems to still be a bit of an expectation, I guess, for particularly sort of C-suite and, you know, sort of very senior leaders, you keep that to yourself. Don't share that with your team. Don't show them any kind of vulnerability, because they'll start not trusting you. They'll figure you're not on top of stuff, and so on and so on. Don't show any kind of weakness. Is this something that you've encountered when you go into an organization? Any kind of reluctance to show that struggle?
Hugely so.
Good. It's not just us. Fabulous.
No. What's really encouraging though is I think the tide is starting to turn on that. I know with some of our partner organizations, we've had fantastic webinars and conversations and testimonial videos where C-suite staff have really opened up their lives to the people that work for them and work with them. And there's a lot to be taken from that, because when you know someone as an individual, you become emotionally invested, not only in their well-being, but in their success as well. Yeah. And it's a huge part of team building. So peeling that back a little bit, thinking of teams, you think, I think of, because of my background, I think of sports teams, and this stiff upper lip stuff, I think you were really kind to dance around it there, but we're talking much about masculine leadership styles, aren't we?
I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah.
It's there.
There's a really interesting dichotomy in the way sports teams are run, because there is so much shouting and so much bullying and stuff like that. But at the same time, all those people like refer to each other as like family members and brothers, and they're totally ingratiated in each other's lives, and there's far more butt touching than you would normally find comfortable in like regular life. So
you're encouraging butt touching. That's what, just to clarify.
Yeah, we're pro. So what you're seeing is, even in some of those like really hyper masculine environments, showing vulnerability to the people around you and the investment that gets from those around you is an enormous sense of strength within teams of people. But then like those sort of ideas of stiff upper lip, not showing weakness and stuff, I know for myself, they were very much ingrained in childhood. They were very much interestingly, the views of both my mother and my father, like they both very much felt like that.
That's a common thing. I think it's a common misconception. I think the same thing with women in business and, you know, anything in that sort of vein. It's a common misconception that the issue is just with the opposite gender or the same gender. I think it's, you know, anything that's taken hold truly in society spreads across the two, doesn't it? It's not exclusive to one or the other.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So like I was very much brought up like of having to like display strength for others, but it's a very closed version of the term strength, because really you think of strength in materials. Strong materials are actually malleable. You think of the way like bamboo can bend in like windstorms without snapping. You think of the way like carbon fiber has certain amounts of flex and give in it, the way cars actually have buckle zones to protect the drivers. Things that are really strong and that can really be relied upon are actually flexible. Yet we have built as a society this really, like, I would call it a ceramic model of strength. So on paper, in terms of the force it can like hold, incredibly strong, but you drop the thing once and it shatters into a million crying pieces. And then like
Yeah.
that shoots all the way up. You look at how COVID is being dealt with. There's some amazing stats out there in like the difference between the way strongman male leaders, mentioning no leaders of this country, are dealing with it, and the way sort of more liberal minded, either like multi-gendered or female leaderships are dealing with it. And it's showing that idea of talking through problems and finding solutions is so much more effective than pretending they don't exist. It's so much more effective.
Yeah. Oh, you put it beautifully, James. That's It's a huge issue. So I mean, what approach do you take? I mean, I know from a coaching point of view, when we encounter people who still have this ingrained sense of got to be rigid, don't show anything, no cracks, everything's fine. I know how we deal with it from a coaching point of view, and obviously again it's not a one size fits all. It depends on the individual to break down those barriers and figure out how to overcome it. But organizationally, if you want to set that as I guess a core value of the organization that you work for, how can you go about doing that, particularly from a remote setting?
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting strategies. The first, again, to go back to when we mentioned the sort of performance of the British people and stiff upper lip before, we were talking about it coming from a place of fear and anxiety, and not wanting to show vulnerability. It's coming from the same place. So our fear generally is of consequence, of harm or danger to ourselves. In this case, we're talking about an emotional consequence. So what people need to see, and what leadership or the leaderships I've worked with look to demonstrate, is that the consequences of demonstrating that can be enormously positive.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, we've looked to promote leaders sharing their own stories or asking people about theirs. So like making a point of removing those barriers. And when we come in and we talk to leadership, because everything begins with initial conversations, health very much is a conversation. That's like the seed that it comes from. We demonstrate those values first. So one particular company that I was heading up, they were a recruitment firm. And I came in on day one. It was a very formal meeting. Everybody's wearing suits. Everyone's around a table. There are folders and stuff.
Oh my God, there were folders. That's serious. That's a very serious meeting.
And I'm like, we're not talking A4. We're talking lever arch. It was serious business. I sort of sat down and I sort of drummed the table and went, wow, this is amazing. Like years back when I was a student, you guys used to get me part-time work. And everyone around the room was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, what did you do for us? When was it? And like, I told like a little bit of storytelling about me being a poor student that spent all of the money he did have on the wrong things. And that those guys like connecting me with employers in the area and how like it was a really positive experience and kept a roof over my head. And because that story went to some like funny, some self-deprecating and some emotional places, everybody in the room was then given license to be the same back.
Right.
And then in my second meeting with them, we met at like the canteen and the coffee shop, stuff like that. Nice. And everything became a lot friendlier. And then you start noticing that when they were introducing me to other members of staff or they were putting things in place, they began demonstrating that vulnerability too. So one leader stood up in front of the team and said that she had always been very short with them in the afternoon, and she understood that they were fearful of that. But what she'd realized after talking to me was that it was coming down to hydration. She was very poorly hydrated. So in the afternoon, she was feeling very low on energy and extremely like headachy and nasally. Yeah. So had no time for any nonsense. If it was bad news, take it somewhere else. But she stood up and she said that to them as a team. And then we launched this hydration drive of people like drinking cups of water competitively and like measuring how many they did over a week. And it was an enormous success, but it came from that place of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Which in turn came from me demonstrating it first.
Yeah.
Which
You're right. People,
barriers.
Yeah. People need to feel comfortable. And as you say, if other people aren't doing it, that, no one wants to be the first to, stick their head above the parapet and go, how about this? Just in case everyone goes, what are you doing?
Absolutely.
Go,
yeah.
okay, never mind. So yeah, no, that's great. I mean, like, it's a really important message to send to people. But again, so from a remote point of view, is it a case of just, I know, what can they do it through video messaging? Can they just send out a little newsletter thing? I mean, how do you do that? Because it needs to also feel authentic and organic, doesn't it? I guess it's not the same if you just go, by the way, here's a vulnerable story just to try and make you feel better. Okay, bye.
It's not a John Lewis advert.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do you do it?
Absolutely. Well, there are soft touch versions of this, like stealth options, and then there's the brute force option. I would be inclined, if somebody said, look, here's the situation for my company, like Pavelka, what can you guys bring in? How can I institute this sort of culture? I would recommend a couple of things. I'd recommend piggybacking an online event. So do those guys have an all hands call? Are there team meetings and stuff like that? So a little bit of introduction saying like, oh, here's so-and-so, they're coming in to talk to us about X today because I know you guys think this, that, 1, 2, 3, the other. And then that conversation is an opportunity to introduce a bit of vulnerability. But also, and this is key, it's every day. When somebody says to you, as we often do in this country, oh, hey, all right, mate. Everybody knows the scripted response to that is all right, and then you just carry on walking. Or if it's your weekly meeting on Zoom, how is everybody? And everybody knows you don't answer that question. You just go, yeah. And then you get, again, like you're all muted, so you're all on the screen doing this. Answer the question. But then also, like when you ask the other person, like respond to what they've said. It's so easy to say, oh, hey, you all right? And they go, yeah. And then you picked up the tone in their voice. You saw the shrug of their shoulders, the tilt of their head. But 9 times out of 10, we just breeze right on by it and go, yeah, so this email blast we were going to send out. You think, I need to get this bit of work done, so I am going to totally ignore whatever kind of emotional anguish I detected in your response. But and very often people won't be in a place where they want to talk about it, but knowing that you are there will sort of, those barriers you mentioned earlier will show that vulnerability is okay.
Yeah.
So on a day-to-day basis, answer the question, like, how are you? Comment on how they are. Did you notice something? Like, and if there are the events and there are those day-to-day interactions, it will start to spread. Yeah.
Brilliant advice. Awesome. Okay. So we've kept going I could talk to you for days, James. I find all of this so interesting, and you clearly know your stuff. I mean,
That's area incredibly kind of you.
It's true. I wouldn't say otherwise. I'd be being all polite, going, "Well, this has been lovely," but no, it really has. It's fascinating. Because I mean, I know we were going to talk about sort of work-life balance and that kind of thing. And I don't know, do you have any sort of key points that you wanted to bring in, sort of condensed versions for, working from home? Here's a little cheat sheet on how to make that work for you. Anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We'll go for 3 bullet points.
All right, I'm going to count you in. 3, 2, 1. Cue James.
Okay, so working from home, work-life balance. Number 1, you've been given the time. You're no longer commuting, you're no longer traveling, but how are you using that time? Because remembering your commute time wasn't actually a part of your directed work hours, so it doesn't need to be now. That's the first one. Just think about it. Second point, you've got to avoid presenteeism. So manage upwards. Find whatever the least showy, least embarrassing way of letting everybody know what you're up to is, and just put that in place. That way you don't need to be afraid of people looking over your shoulder, and you can relax a bit. And thirdly, and this one's a bit more scientific, you have moved from what we would call a high stimulation environment, where there are lots of sights, lots of sounds, lots of movement, to a low stimulation environment. I mean, that is a huge generalization. You could be in Deptford in London and find that it's a very stimulating environment. Like, you're sat there. Anyway,
Yeah.
What you need to do is be very aware of what we call executive function. It's different for everyone, so I'm not going to waste people's time by quoting a figure, but your attention span is finite. You need to lean into that if you are going to maintain productivity. So work out how long you can realistically pay attention to something for, and set a timer. When that timer goes off, stop it, get up, move around, get a drink, get outside if you can, then come back. You will be refreshed, you'll be motivated, and you will be more productive. Loads of studies have shown that the longer you just stare at a thing, the less of your brain power you're capable of harnessing and using. So don't force yourself to do it. You can get more done in short 20-minute bursts than you can do in an hour. So that's the third one.
Awesome. That is absolutely brilliant. James, thank you so much for joining me and being the first person as well to join me on the comfy seats. Love it. You've set a pretty high bar. So everyone else is going to look at this interview and go, no, I'm good, thanks. No, I'm not going to join in. So thanks for that.
Short but sweet series. Thank you very much. I am mortally embarrassed by the compliments, but I will, as is our way in this country, I will treasure them forever.
Good. Excellent. All done. That was James Blair, biochemist, scientific advisor at Pavelka Limited, and all-round awesome guy. This is only the first in the On the Comfy Seat series. There are plenty more coming up with really, really interesting guests. So please, if mindset and striving for personal excellence is your thing, or if you just like a good conversation and a bit of a giggle, please do subscribe, as there's plenty more to come.